Are you looking for an affordable home located near school, work, and fun? Are you downsizing or leaving the area and looking to sell your home? Reach out to the State College Community Land Trust today. We have been buying, rehabbing, and selling permanently affordable homes in the State College Borough since 1996. We keep land in trust and homes within reach always, so that income-qualified individuals, families, and their pets can find their forever homes.
You're watching CNET, Center County's Government and Educational Access Network.
Sponsorship for this program is brought to you in part by Town and Gown Magazine. If it's happening in Happy Valley, it's in Town and Gown Magazine.
Welcome, everybody. We're very happy to have you here this evening. I'm Dan Marriott, Associate Professor of Landscape Architecture at Penn State. I know you're familiar with the Rethinking322 project. I know you've seen many of our students wandering around your homes, your fields, and in your offices as well over the last couple of years. And I know you're also familiar with the Rethinking322 booklet, which the students have produced. I want to let you know that volumes 2 and 3 will be available on December 5th. We're doing final editing right now. So feedback from the student projects in the fall of 23 and the spring of 24 are on their way out to continue the information sharing that we've been doing with this project. We're very proud of the document's contribution to Rethinking322, and I'm deeply grateful for all of you for your generous embrace of my students as they've been working with you all over the last couple of years. My students, raise your hands, guys. So they're the future of transportation in this country. So be nice to them when it's over. We're in the middle of a transportation revolution right now, here in the Commonwealth, in the US, and around the globe. We are rethinking how we're moving around the landscape, and we're rethinking how we're impacting the land at the same time. It's an important conversation. It's a conversation for the 21st century that we need to embrace and think about carefully. The goal of Rethinking322 has to provide visitors and residents who walk, bus, bike, and drive through Pennsbrush Valley and throughout the center region with new ways to think about our relationship with transportation and mobility. And it's a way to have a conversation for the larger valley and region too, within the context of the State College Area Connector. To me and to my class, it's not just a possibility of a certain type of road going through the valley. It's an opportunity to rethink the large area here and what we want to be in the future, who we are right now, and how we change. Roads change communities, but so do other actions too in terms of environmental issues, climate change issues, connectivity and all that. So it's an opportunity to talk and engage. Tom Yoners, who's here, asked me to get involved with this project just over 2 years ago. Tom, thank you. He said, we'd really like to get your expertise as part of this. And I really hesitated because I know what it's like. Transportation projects are challenging, divisive, and exhausting. But I went to a meeting here, and I was really impressed with the people that I met. And I was impressed by the idea of the civil conversation that I was hearing. There were lots of different opinions, for and against different things, very strongly held opinions. But everyone did agree on one thing, which I really liked. It was clear that the road belonged on that other side of the valley. Okay? Which theoretically is quite successful. But that impressed me as an opportunity. I thought it'd be a great chance to get my students engaged with this. Importantly, though, and this is what really got me engaged with the project, everyone I spoke to, and everyone I've spoken to over the last 2 years, and I've told my students as well, everyone knows that the road is not safe, that something has to change. And that's not a bad place to be starting from. The other thing we're hearing too is the beauty of the valley, and that these changes need to respect this gateway to breathtaking agricultural landscape in the shadow of Mount Nittany. It's who we are as a region, it's who we are as a university, and it's an important part of the cultural landscape and context of Pennsylvania. And this is really important to me. We have all these things, we've got conversations and ideas, and this is where we're going with this. So we started the studio course in the fall of 2022 in the Department of Landscape Architecture. You all know, and my students have been instructed very much, we are not endorsing any corridor. Quite frankly, that's not our job. It is for you, the people for whom the decisions will have the greatest impact, to make that decision based on what you know from PennDOT and based on what we can share with you. We view our job as to provide information and ideas and options so you can think about the whole project holistically within a larger context. To this end, and why we're here this evening, I invited my friend and colleague Ian Lockwood, who immediately offered to bring along the rest of his staff as well, Cindy Zerger and Alex McKeag from Toole Design. They've just arrived this afternoon from Orlando, Oakland, California, and Chicago. So, yeah, and we had a few fall leaves left, so I'm very, very happy for that as well. So, their office is transforming how we think about transportation. And I'm so honored and pleased to have them here to share their knowledge with all of you. There's lots of different ways to think about this, and we're going to share, as we've been doing all along, different things, to give you a menu, to give you some choices, to give you some moments of conversation. I think this is a really exciting time with this project. I first worked with Ian in 2002 on a controversial freeway project for the historic Arroyo Seco Parkway in California. We were working with Caltrans, which is the State Department of Transportation there. It was the highest accident facility in Los Angeles, so it's not an enviable title. But it was quite a challenge to figure that out. And what I really loved about first getting to know Ian was, and I've been saying this to my class and everyone I talked to here too, safety matters. Safety is important. We never do anything that doesn't have an impact that's favorably moving forward regarding safety. But Ian's ability to look at safety through the context of the place gave us a whole new way and a way to talk to Caltrans about how we can look at safety and improving the communities overall as well. We also worked together at different times in the Middleburg Traffic Calming Project for US Route 50 in Virginia. Communities came together. They were concerned about the intersection between through truck traffic and local communities. Does that sound slightly familiar to anybody? Okay. So there are models for these types of concerns and models for these types of problems to be solved as well. Since that time, our careers, I think, have been crisscrossing all over the place, often one of us before or after the other one, and not realizing it until recently, quite honestly. But I'm really excited to have them here. So, this evening would not be possible without the support of the Department of Landscape Architecture, which is committed following this project with this studio course happening every year. So we will be a resource for the communities as we go through. We're here tonight through the generous support from the Hamer Center for Community Design, also the Stuckman School, and the Center County Historical Society. In addition, we've had great support from Penn State Sustainability and the Penn State Larson Transportation Institute and the College of Engineering. I also want to thank PennDOT. PennDOT is here tonight. They have shown a genuine interest in this project. They've talked to our students. They've been coming to all the student presentations since we started this, so thank you to PennDOT. Lastly, I want to thank all of you for welcoming me and my students into your homes, your farms, your communities, offices, and organizations. From Clearwater Conservancy to Coons and Darlington Farms, it's been enlightening. And all these voices and all these ideas help give us a stronger idea of what we have here and what needs to happen here. So now I hope you will join me in welcoming Ian and his brilliant team from Toole Design for an evening of Rethinking 322.
Hi everybody, thanks for coming. We're really happy to be here. We didn't bring our whole staff. We had 320 people in our staff, so 3 of us came. Really happy to be here. Between us, we've probably been involved with about 30 or 40 different highway reimagining projects. Oh no. I am.
Is it plugged in?
Yeah. There it is. Next one.
No? Okay.
I hope I'm not stepping on something that's important. All right, try again. So we didn't bring the whole crew. Our firm, we're a mission-based firm, and we don't build highways. We reimagine them. We take them down. We change them into boulevards. We try and make them suit their communities. Most of our projects are in urban environments where the highway was plowed through and created lots of problems. But we also work in many rural environments, and I'll show you some of those tonight. And we've been gathering in cities and so forth about 10,000 years, and for the last 100 years we've had cars. Cars have been popular, and they have completely changed the way we live and move and so on. And so we've had about 3 generations struggling with these issues, and about 400 generations getting us to where we're at right now. And I think in the last couple of generations we're realizing that what we thought was the right way of going about things in the 1950s and 60s might not have been exactly right. We've had some trial and error, and I think we're learning, and I think we're getting better at living with our environment and in our landscapes, in our cities, and in our rural areas. So we're going to go over a whole bunch of projects and ideas with you tonight. I'm a transportation engineer. I do a lot of work with multimodalism to help folks ride bikes, take transit, walk, drive in harmony, so that some don't preclude others. With me is Alex and Cindy. Alex will be speaking first. He has a background in urban design through a sustainability lens, and he has worked with the Congress of the New Urbanism, where he ran their Freeway with No Futures project and did a lot of research on cities around the country reimagining their highways, cities and rural areas. He joined Toole Design Group, and he's part of our highway reimagining group, and he's also an urban designer. Then Cindy's here, and she has a background in landscape architecture and planning. She's our national urban design lead, and she works in all sizes and shapes of communities right across the country. And she is passionate about the whole highway reimagining area as well. So I think I'll stop there, and Alex will kick us off, and then Cindy will do the middle part, and I'll do the end part. Okay, thank you. Alex.
Well, okay, thanks, Ian. So that's us, as you can tell. So I just want to kind of start off things to give you all a sense of how we got here in the highway reimagining movement. When the Interstate Highway Act came to be, it was 1956, and in 15 years we built 26,000 miles of interstate highway in this country. And to give you a sense, that is enough to encircle the Earth and then some. The number today is closer to almost double that, 48,000 miles of interstate highway. That's an awful lot of concrete and asphalt. And when the interstate highway system went in, even before it went in, we had a lot of people, including a really intelligent sociologist and urban thinker named Lewis Mumford, who understood and feared what the highways would do to our cities. He talked about highways as arteries and entering into the delicate tissue of our cities. And he was right. There was something wrong with these highways entering into our cities. The original intention of the interstate system was, as this image shows, the interstates would link cities together, but it would not route through them. Instead, the highways would sort of stay on the periphery of the urban environment and the interstate would sort of diffuse into this local street network and be context sensitive to the area in which the streets were into. But as we know, that's not necessarily what happened. As implemented, the highways were built on the outsides and into the cities. And it created massive interchanges, huge land needs, and severed and destroyed thousands of neighborhoods across the country. Well, what happened? Well, Dwight D. Eisenhower, who signed the Interstate Highway Act into law, later regretted part of the decision. He said that was against his original intent. He went on to say it was against his original concept and wishes, and did not love that his name was attached to the legacy of the interstate highway system. But, as we know, the highways were built. So, what happens now? No city was left unchanged by the interstate highway system. City images were changed, city form was changed, the nature and relationship between land use and transportation was forever changed. But today there's this opportunity, and it's called highway reimagining. So, what happens now? Well, what Ian was mentioning, what we do as a firm, is we help communities reimagine highways. And the question that is presented tonight is what does that look like? This is just a graphic that shows that you can rethink these highways as something different, as something that is context sensitive, that is more closely related to the original intent of the interstate highway system. And so that the highways are not just, or that these paths are not just conduits for fast-moving cars. And it's also important to note that as soon as the highways went into these cities, people have been trying to get them out. The movement started small, but it's been going on for decades, and it's gained success and has had a lot of setbacks. I think, Ian, you've personally been involved in about 35, 36 different highway reimaginings around the country over the past 3 decades. So Ian's had a hand in a great many of these. But for many of us, the moment came here with the Every Place Counts Design Challenge. That was the US DOT in 2016, the final year of the Obama administration, had this design challenge that happened in 4 cities to help these communities reimagine what the highway had done to bifurcate their neighborhoods, and ask the question, how could changes be made to reconnect those communities? It was the first major admission by the US government that highways actually did harm to these communities. And what was also going on in the background for several years of advocacy work is an organization that I used to work at and was involved in, the Congress for the New Urbanism. They have been tracking highway removals since, for the better part of 2 decades now, putting out a biannual report, Freeways Without Futures, that lists the top 10 highways that need to go in the United States. But they've been tracking these efforts since the 90s. And there's this broader coalition today too, the Freeway Fighters Network. They are currently actively tracking almost 100 active highway removal campaigns in the United States. And it's a coalition of advocates that are sharing ideas, asking for help, signing letters, sharing advice, and brainstorming ways in which they can reconnect their communities. And with all of this momentum and with all of this, all these conversations happening, there was not a great language to talk about these issues. So there was a need for a common language so people could have sort of informed conversations about the types of projects that they wanted to see in their communities. So Toole Design several years ago worked on this, the emerging language of highway removals, to put forth a vocabulary for a way for people in the communities, campaigns, to talk about highway removal. And it's important to note that the language is evolving. That's why it says evolving language, that no highway removal is the same. We often work in very urban communities, but this is applicable in rural communities as well. Within the report, we separated out different types. There's ways to mitigate existing highways. So here are 6 different ways highways can be mitigated, the worst impacts. And I'm sure any of you who've been on these highways, you are familiar with a lot of these. And there are more that are adding in. There's an entire collection around interchange and ramp removal that helps to make highway removal possible and highway reimagining possible that Ian will talk about, and even widening, stopping widening from happening too. Within that typology, or the typology, there are several removal types, which we'll talk about too. Here are a couple: spur, section, relocation, prevention, and redundant section removal. But I think it's critical to know is that the answer to the question of is it removal or is it mitigation is the highway still there? Because if it's still there, it's just mitigated. And why is that important? Well, mitigation solves micro problems. It solves problems just in the small area in which the mitigation is happening. Those include local noise pollution, light pollution, maybe disconnections for bus and bikes and peds. It maybe fix some aesthetic issues and might help increase adjacent land values, but you still end up with a highway on either side of the mitigated issue. So that can be great in certain places. It's not generally what we advocate for. That's what you're seeing here with the CAP in proposal for the Vine Street Expressway in Philadelphia, if any of you are familiar. But removal or reimagining the highway goes several steps further. It solves macro and micro problems. So what that does is it changes things like city form and city image. What does your city, what does your borough, what does your town, what does your community want to be? Removing the highway, reimagining what it can be, can change the entire image and trajectory of a place. And I want to give you a few examples. So this is Rochester, New York. You're going to hear several examples tonight. This is just one. The removal of the inner loop dates back to the 1990s. It was actually written into the comprehensive plan, the 1999 comprehensive plan, the Renaissance plan for Rochester, New York. They understood that the traffic volumes on the highway did not necessitate the need for a highway. So they put it in their plan. They said, we are going into the 21st century. It's 1999. What do we want to be? We don't want this here anymore. So they planned. They didn't have the funding, but they had the idea. And it was only 2.5 mile long section, but at its final peak before it closed down, 7,000 cars per day. Very, very few. This is what it looked like. I don't have a historic photo, but you can imagine that this was a row of buildings, a vibrant neighborhood before. This is the sunken highway, the depressed highway that was put in. And it took nearly a decade of planning and engineering, lots of discussions and political will, but eventually this got filled in to look like this. The city even put up a live stream to watch people for the entire filling in process, so you could see truckloads of dirt being dumped in to raise up the depressed highway to street level. They put in a brand new street. There's new development going in, housing, needed housing, and restitched the community together. And another final example that I want to give you is Detroit. So this is a historic street network of Detroit. After World War II, Detroit was growing. It had enormous wealth, unscathed by World War II. But it also has the moniker of Motor City because it went all in on cars. It went all in on a set of values that said car is king, and they built a lot of highways. So this is Hastings Street in Detroit, a vibrant black neighborhood. Take a look at this steeple here. This is the street network that resulted after Detroit went all in on highways. This is what it turned into. The connectivity and the relationship changed, the city form changed, completely transformed the image of the city. And here it is. And this is what was put in. Yes. And you can see that's the church. And it didn't just change the relationship in the neighborhoods adjacent to the highway. North of the highway, the entire form, the entire relationship changed, became a logistics center. People left, people fled the city of Detroit, and this is what it looks like today. But I say all of this because there's hope. There was an opening for Reimagining. This is the 375, the highway that I just showed you, 375. About 15 years ago, there was this initial sketch that you see here that Ian did. Shared it with the Michigan DOT, and he was laughed out of the room. But good ideas are hard to keep down. And this idea sort of crept in and it bubbled for several years. And the idea to remove this stub of 375 and restore the relationships started to become popular. And in 2017, the Michigan DOT heard the cries of the community saying, we want something done with this, and they decided to move ahead with ripping out I-375 and restore a surface street. And it's important because Detroit, this is all happening in the backdrop of Detroit coming back and the vibrancy of the city of Detroit being restored. And it's seen this major renaissance. And why it's seeing this major renaissance is because it's doing all the things that it had done before the highways went in. It was investing in people and places, transit, art, multimodal connections, joy, and health. It's not all great. The plan by the DOT, imagine that, a group of engineers planning, taking out a highway, they still didn't quite get it right. The community was pretty unhappy with what the city of Detroit, with the Michigan DOT had put forth. Some suggestions some quotes from concerned citizens. What happened to restoring Hastings Street? They're replacing a highway with a big arterial road, which is also a barrier. But, there's something to be said about applauding the DOT. When your dog quotes Shakespeare, it's not correct. It's not cool to correct his grammar. So it's a major admission. It's a major admission that the DOT is doing the right thing and removing this highway and allowing the communities to reconnect and reimagining a different future for the city of Detroit. And in fact, we have been helping them with a peer review of their plan to make it even better and to hopefully produce better outcomes for the city of Detroit. And one of the last things I'll say is this is all happening in the background of, remember how I mentioned that the US DOT made this admission that highways were a problem? Well, now the US DOT has something called the Reconnecting Communities Pilot Program, or Pilot Grant Program, which maybe some of you have heard about, and they've pledged over $1 billion for highway reimaginings and similar efforts to reconnect communities and to address the barriers caused by infrastructure. So there is money behind this, there is backing by the federal government, there is this understanding that now is the time to be thinking about reimagining these spaces. So before I pass it over to Cindy, what I want to say is that the decision to reimagine 322 is not a technical feasibility issue. We all know it's hard, and we know it can be done. It has been done. It's going to continue to happen in communities all across the country. But also, just like those other projects that I shared with you, that it must be a community-driven decision. So I'm going to pass it on to Cindy.
Good to go? Okay, great, awesome. Yes, it is such an important note that it is a community-driven decision. I think that's what we're here really to convey, that you need to be a part of the conversation moving forward in what happens with 322. And I'd offer also, when we think about these systems, so often engineers are part of the conversation and front and center. And our profession, Dan's profession, my profession as landscape architects, also have some influence here and want to provide you with some thoughts around how landscape architects might approach some of these projects. This image is a bit of a jarring contrast to what I'm going to be talking about, but it's a really important one for me. This is what we end up creating when we just have a singular mindset to a solution, when we engineer it and not think about the design of a place. It's a powerful image. I love it. Well, I mean, I don't think I love it, but I really appreciate it for two reasons. One, that's my boss in yellow, and he did survive, so that's a really important thing. And it's also a reminder to me, kind of daily, is when we think about our linear spaces, again, with that singular mentality, and we focus on speed, we add just one more lane. This was also a road that was much smaller. It was probably not over some other, it wasn't an overpass. We designed this, we add just another lane, is what we talk about. And this is, it could be anywhere, USA, right? This is technically our public realm. And it also makes me think about, what if we were to call these spaces linear landscapes? Would we bring a different mindset to them? Would we bring a different process, and therefore a different designed solution? We look at communities large and small across the country, and when we talk about quality of life, we often look at indicators like parks and open space. The black figures on this slide are parks and open space, actually, of Detroit. So that's a good synergy in our presentations here. We talk about acreage of open space. We talk about how far people are from these open spaces, and we actually sometimes even, rank our cities or communities based on these open spaces. But we also need to be thinking about these spaces. These are public rights-of-way. These are also public open spaces. And they actually arguably make up the largest amount of public space in a city and in communities. And if we conceive of these assets differently, yes, they definitely need to provide a transportation function. We know that. But it is possible to think of them as multifunctional spaces, and we surely would design them differently. Perhaps we would design them with the same approach we do to our parks, to the places that we love and cherish. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about a different kind of a design approach, I think, that could perhaps resonate and apply to thinking about 322. And perhaps other public rights-of-way are conceived in and around the area. It's the idea of path as place. And I'm going to say this is a very personal kind of conversation for me. This idea came to me actually when I was riding on a trail, not unlike this space. I did not have this beautiful side or this context in which I was biking, but this little tiny detail here. This is a flush ribbon curb, and it really, in this instance, when I was biking along this trail, there was an area in the community where they were actually ripping this out. And I was really to widen the trail. Certainly there's reasons they were doing that, but it was really a bummer to me because it really completes that trail for me. It certainly has a function. It's actually a structural detail to keep an asphalt trail from sloughing or from eroding at the edges, but it also adds to the feeling of completeness, to the placeness of that trail. And it's still, again, largely a place to move through, but the feeling feels different, right? So, a typical trail feels a little bit just quick, kind of slapdash, but when we add that detail, so that was the idea behind Path as Place. It was a powerful experience to me in my work as a landscape architect in transportation and mobility, and it led me to this idea of Path as Place. And I think we can define any path as a road, a street, a trail, a track, a highway, even a route, any linear feature, as through its design and composition, is all or part of a place. A defined area, a location, or a space within a built or natural environment. So that's the idea behind it, and it's been helpful for us as we work within communities to talk about it in that space, I think, because we all know and love places that in our communities, and it's about bringing that sort of sensibility and that a sense of attention to detail, even at any scale. So it when you experience it. It can happen in a variety of scales and different contexts. This is an old elevated rail, becomes a place in New York. If you've been here, it's a wonderful experience on the High Line. Bikeways through, again, detailing. This one's profoundly memorable, as is this one. Again, just that sensibility to really crafting the space. Even a highway, I'm not suggesting this for 322 at all. Ian will share some great ideas there. But this highway, Paris Pike in Kentucky, becomes a scenic and memorable experience because of how the paths, the road, work with the topography. They respect the landscape and capitalize on the view sheds. Certainly, again, not appropriate for your context, but I think it's another example of a path as place. And so generally what we often talk about is our experience of path and place are really inextricably linked. Sometimes the path and the place are the same, such as a main street. These are some fun cartoons that Ian did for this idea. And sometimes the path really contributes and supports its place, a street in a downtown or adjacent to a parkway or a waterfront. A path can be equal, but is never more important than a place. As we see in the bottom, it should never dominate that sense of place. And when it does, it really deteriorates the sense of community and that sense of enjoyment in that space. It's certainly applicable to every context as well. So it can grow from a real urban idea to a natural. Of course, that's going to look different, right? Path as place is going to look different in different contexts. And so how can we design, not engineer the right solution here? And I think it doesn't mean that engineering isn't a part of the solution, but that we need to work together. I don't think there's a singular discipline that has the solution, but rather it comes from an approach. And if we conceive of the context as place, we will design these spaces differently. So I actually came across this article not long ago. Actually, Dan was a part of this. If you haven't read it, I really recommend it. Roadways and the Land, the Landscape Architect's Role. This was actually from the year 2000, but it so resonated with me. And I wanted to share this aspect. I do think the role of landscape architect is perhaps a missing link in the current solutions. And this article goes on to say that landscape architects must develop well-defined aesthetic rules to complement the very well-defined structural and engineering rules. And this is certainly likely true. But I'd also offer it's about an approach, how we as landscape architects think about space. And there are 3 components I think I'd like to share with you about how we think about space and what might happen with 322. It's the ideas of curation, of culture, and of choreography. So the idea of curation, the act of forming an experience through the selection and organization of elements. Think of a museum experience, a park space you love, even the grocery store. These experiences are highly curated for you to have the right experience there. And it's about in a landscape, and certainly this is not applicable here, but I think it's a really great, easy image to understand what I'm talking about in terms of curation. But it's about the program of space. It's about relationships and orientation. We're thinking about this as landscape architects often on a micro and a macro level. Again, not necessarily the right solution, but people know where, the space is very legible. People know where to walk. They know where biking is. They know where there might be eddies or places of respite along there. And so maybe in the context of 322, those sort of programmatic elements are at a greater scale. And maybe we're thinking about the relationships and sequence of space as people pass through, and that those who want to be in that location as well. Culture is the expression of shared values, experiences, and histories of place. I think that's really, really pretty fundamental when you talk about a community-based decision, that we bring all the people and all of the different voices of folks who not only pass through this area but want to be there. This is, it's, every place is the culture of many, and this is a diagram I just share because I love how elegant it is, and there's many different people that and groups that inhabit a space, that pass through it and enjoy the space. This diagram really represents the broad range of users. Again, not necessarily for 322, but in this project, talking about their own identities, their stories, and their time scale in which they experience space. So each of these different community groups talked about how they experience place when they're there, how often they're there, and then I think the interesting thing is the relationships in this space. So again, when we think about culture and culture of space, thinking about all those user groups is really important, not just those who are passing through. And choreography is the act of composing various movements within and through space. And so, oftentimes as landscape architects, when we design park spaces, when we design streets, when we design for public realm, we're thinking about that sequence of experience, the dance that we all do in public space. It's constantly in the forefront of our mind as designers, and how do or how should different modes interact. I think for a transportation project, these are just fun diagrams by Lawrence Halprin, landscape architect that I love. He designed this space up above, but sort of talking about the sequence of space and the kind of like idea of how he wanted people to experience his landscapes. And I think it was a real nice sort of rhythm that he created. His wife was also a dancer, so I think he was very inspired by her as a choreographer as well. So something to think about in your space. How are you choreographing that along 322? And I'm gonna, the last thing I'll do is share with you a project we're working on. This is near my neck of the woods out in California. And you can kind of see, is this the, yeah. Here is, let's see, there's a highway here. And you can just see they really, really, really wanted to connect this all the way over to a highway here. And the Caltrans started to buy up this land. And the city and the community really fought that, but they had already purchased some of that land. You can see actually where they're going to put some interchanges here. And it's been sitting like this for years, many decades, since since Caltrans started buying up the land, and that they've actually now given the land back to the city, or they've given it to the city. It was homeowners who lived here, but now it's back to the city, and so they've started to develop this parkway concept. And we're working to help them on reimagining this space, and this is the parkway here that they're going to connect. And perhaps, debatable whether it's the right, solution. But I think what I want to mention here is, that it is going to connect to two parks. A parkway was meant to originally, its original concept was meant to connect two parks and then have a park-like experience through it. And so in this instance, in creating a parkway versus a highway, a much smaller road that leaves such wonderful opportunities for other things. Things like creek restoration. We can address water quality in this. Future housing opportunities that we are sorely in need of, multifamily housing in that area. So really has presented a wonderful opportunity. If this had all been an interchange, it would be a really different experience for this community. Another way to look at it, in cross-section, again, how we're allowing for multiple functions in this space, a wonderful creek restoration, places to inhabit, and transportation certainly is within this. Mobility is within it, but it's not dominating the experience. The parkway over here is not a barrier. So this is what it sort of is looking like in some of the renderings. We have been really focused on the design of the trail system, which in this one looks like it just goes straight as a bullet, but actually comes through and meanders into some of this area. And then some of these other spaces, this restorations, creek restoration, and also the park spaces along it. And the transportation system is certainly part of it, but walking and biking isn't an afterthought. It's not just accommodated, but it's celebrated. So another quote from that wonderful article that I mentioned earlier, and I think this is really an important one. 3 mentalities should be gathered around the drawing board. One should be creative and aesthetic, the second analytical, and the third technical and practical. If these 3 mentalities do not exist in a single mind, they must always be present in terms of absolute equality in the group or team responsible for design. And I think that's so critical when we're thinking about our roadway systems and how they really work within our landscapes. And so I would offer an addition to Alex's thoughts. So as he mentioned, we know it's technically feasible to reimagine some of these highways. It must be community driven. And if that path as place approach were employed, what would the solution be? So I'll hand it over to Ian.
Thank you, Cindy. Okay. So what I'd like to talk about is both the part of 322 that's in town and also the rural part to your east. And I'm going to start with some stories from other places where we work. I'm gonna go over the battle we had over Virginia Route 50. So this was my very first highway reimagining project that started in 1995, it involved these 3 little towns in this absolutely beautiful countryside with, you know, functioning working ranches and farms and a lot of equestrian activities. And they were called Upperville, Aldi, and Middleburg. So there's Aldi, Middleburg, and Upperville. And the rural road that ran through the area also ran through these 3 little villages, which made their main street. And so over time, the Virginia DOT evolved the main streets to look more or less like the highway. And so folks were speeding through the highway, and they had a lot of safety issues in their community. And so the DOT offered to help these little villages by doing bypasses around them, so that the traffic didn't have to go through their towns. However, if the traffic didn't go through the towns, it had to go through the landscape. And on each side of these little towns, there was all sorts of historic resources. There was people's farms. There was families who had worked this land for generations. And it was just, frankly, beautiful countryside. So everyone on the north side of these 3 little towns wanted the bypasses to go on the south side of the town. Everyone on the south side wanted the bypasses on the north. And so it became a real feud. And so I was asked to arbitrate between these different folks. And it wasn't pleasant. And friends turned into enemies over this, depending on what side of town they lived on. And so what was at stake was literally the farm and the land and the landscape. So folks didn't want those beautiful landscapes destroyed. Now, the folks who ran businesses in the 3 little towns didn't want the bypasses at all, because they knew if the bypass went in, there would be what we call bypass development. And they're usually in the form of national, oh geez, I know what I'm doing, I'm touching the power button. The switch to the power bar that runs this whole thing is right by my left foot, and if I move my foot,
Wait, which is
I flick the switch.
You're there?
That's
Yeah, but I think I got it.
so. When this gets turned into a video, you can edit this out, right? Okay.
Ian, when I was working there, they never took me to the beach like this.
That's the ocean that just goes up the edge of DC.
There.
Okay, I'm going to stand a little further away from that switch. So the folks who had the farms didn't want the bypasses and on their side of town, and the business people didn't want the national chains to come in and knock out the local hardware store and so forth that happens so often in these smaller communities. So it was a bit of a quandary. There wasn't a good answer, and so I asked the community to talk about the vision. How did they want to see their community over time? And I asked them to think about what this place should be in 100 years. And I picked 100 years because that meant everybody in the room would be dead by the time the 100 years had passed. And that meant we didn't have to worry about budgets and personal issues or anything like that. And they described this beautiful, bucolic countryside, unspoiled, with the way of life, the rural way of life that they'd enjoyed for generations. And none of them had a highway bypass in their vision. Not a single person. And so they met and they talked about it, and they came to a consensus. And this was their vision, that the future of rural Route 50 is a scenic, unique rural community in a historical, agricultural, quiet, and natural setting. And then they spelled it out what this vision meant. This vision statement was developed as a means to guide and assess land use planning and transportation decisions for the next 100 years, with the idea that any proposal for change should be measured against it, or in terms of its potential to fulfill or destroy the vision. So this became a litmus test for everything. If the change helped, they would support it. If it hurt, they would fight it, which is a very powerful thing because they just loved their community and their countryside. And so there was no room for a bypass, and there was a safety issue. And so I recalled from a friend of mine, he was the head of transportation for Denmark. And so this is 1995, 1996. And when he was a young engineer in the early 70s, Denmark ran out of money for highway bypasses and so forth. And they wanted to put public money into crazy things like healthcare and education and these others. So that's where their values lay. So they were running out of money, and so they couldn't build the bypasses. So his employer, their equivalent of the DOT, gave him 3 little towns to experiment on. And each one of them had a highway come in, became the main street, and came out as a highway again. And they had safety issues and problems. And they would have had a bypass had they had the money. So he ended up, in retrospect, retrofitting the main streets to slow the traffic down and allow the town functions and the traffic functions to coexist in harmony. And the 3 towns were very different, and they were each hugely successful. And so that became national policy, very quickly. And so the DOT saved a lot of money. The businesses didn't lose to bypass development, and the rural roads were preserved, and it was a huge success. And now if you go anywhere in Europe, there's an organization called PARC that's like the Institute of Transportation Engineers here. And these ideas spread all over. So if you're in France or Switzerland or anywhere like that, Germany, you'll see his fingerprints. A little rural highway will come in, there'll be a transition zone as you enter town, and then it'll be calmed and it'll become a little rural road at the other end. So that's the book he wrote, and he gave me a copy of it. And in it talks about the theory. So historically, these communities were fine. The rural road would go through and be a functioning main street. But as the street was specialized for throughput and motor vehicle users, it became more of like a highway, and it split the town in half and became a barrier. And so the knee-jerk reaction was to build bypass, and that's what was happening, which they couldn't afford. So the idea was to change the nature of the street, again, so that the different user groups could coexist. So this resonated really well with the community, to change the design of the road that so all the user groups could use the same space equitably, and that's what Cindy was talking about. And we thought it was great. It would save the DOT money, it would save the landscape, it would save people's farms, and it would save the businesses, and it would be safer. All the problems that everyone was complaining about. So we suggested this, the community, and I suggested this to the DOT, and there was this oversized negative reaction against this. Like, it was not just no, but they were viscerally saying, no, absolutely not, you have to have a bypass. And we were wondering, why? And so we kept pushing because it seemed like a really great idea. It works all over Europe. For about 20 years it would work here. And since then we've done this in a few places now, and it works fine. So they were really supportive of this idea. And then, so there's the 3 little towns out here. And there's Washington, D.C., and West Virginia is over there. What we learned was that the DOT wasn't there to help the 3 little towns with the safety on their main streets. They needed these bypasses because there was a plan that wasn't public to build a giant freeway from Washington to West Virginia, and it happened to go down Route 50. They needed the right-of-way That's what this was about. It wasn't about safety, it was about building this giant highway that Senator Byrd from West Virginia had championed. And his economic development plan for West Virginia was to build this giant highway so that he could build tract homes, low-density suburban homes in West Virginia, and that would help his economy. And people would then drive all the way through Virginia to get to work in Washington, D.C. every day in the morning and the afternoon. That was his idea of a great idea. And so once folks knew that, then it wasn't a debate anymore about bypasses or anything. The whole nature of the conversation changed, and everybody had to mobilize to prevent this interstate highway from coming in and destroying their farms, their way of life, the landscape, and the history. And so the area was threatened with this large highway, and this is a functioning farming area. It's been like that for a long time, and it threatened their character-rich little rural roads. It was going down a highway that has a lot of stone bridges and stone walls along the side. Civil War battles were fought across these walls. It's just steeping in history. It was a real ham-fisted kind of context-insensitive idea which galvanized the entire community against this idea of taking this absolutely beautiful country road and turning it into something that did not belong in that context and that landscape. And the Virginia DOT had started it, and it was starting to get widened, and what followed it was exactly what people feared, was the suburban sprawl. And what were beautiful farms, the last crop they would grow is these suburban houses, and that would be it. The developers would make one-time profit, and the land would be gone forever. So we met at the school, at the churches, in people's houses. We drew these plans of the whole corridor. There was like hundreds of feet of these drawings of the whole corridor about how to deal with each intersection, because this was kind of new stuff. That's our parade float for the Christmas parade, to get the word out. And we wrote lots of papers, and this is a public meeting that was well attended. In one of these towns, there were 600 people, and when we had meetings like this, 400 people showed up. Like every adult that wasn't babysitting was at those meetings. We even wrote a musical about it. And so we had the vanilla Department of Transportation because we didn't want to, call anybody out. Anyway, and it was an educational musical about highway reimagining. It's been performed twice, I'll have you know. And then, so we drew plans. Artists in the community volunteered their time, and like this sort of highway entrance into this one town would turn into something beautiful like that. Some of the busier intersections would turn into roundabouts. So we'd have preserve the rural road and have town-friendly speeds when the road got to towns, so that the towns wouldn't get divided. And different cross sections. This one was for where there was a left turn, so we developed a beautiful median with an opening so people could turn in and keep the aesthetic and the look that everybody wanted. This was one of the main towns with an entry sequence at each end and a slower speed through the town. So all of these plans came together, and the fight continued. It was a vicious fight. We got federal funding for this, and they did everything they could to kill the funding, to use it for other things. It lasted for years, and we eventually won. But it wasn't a technical decision, and Alex went over that a little bit. It was political. Eventually, because the DOT could not say yes to the community, because they were charged with building this highway. So it didn't matter what we said, they had to keep pushing their agenda. And it eventually went to Senator Warner in Virginia, the older one. Some of you might remember him, he was a very powerful senator, yeah. And also Senator Graham in Florida helped support that, because we're doing another equally cool project in Florida at the time. And so they decided that the giant highway was not happening, and that this context-sensitive landscape preservation site project would happen. So 29 years later, the project has been an enormous success. VDOT now uses it as their poster child for context-sensitive design, and the traffic volumes haven't changed. And this is an important point, because when I arrived on the scene in the 90s, the traffic forecasts were saying that the traffic volumes are going to double. You know, they had this modeling that said the traffic volumes are going to go up, and so then we had to do these bypasses to accommodate the additional traffic. And we look back in time, and the traffic forecast from the 70s said that the traffic volumes are going to double by the 90s, and it was the 90s, and they hadn't changed. The 80s forecast said the same thing, and we weren't halfway there. And so we figured that the only way that the traffic forecast could occur is if the highway was built. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So had they built it, the traffic volumes would have gone up, and they would say, hey, see, good thing we built the highway. So, and I'll go over a few examples of where traffic demand forecast modeling should not be the driver of the decision for your community. It should be your vision, because the traffic demand forecast models are only one version of the future. If you decide to lower your traffic volumes, you can by making changes. And I just want to guarantee to you tonight that traffic volumes are not an incompressible fluid in a pipe that has to go somewhere. They're malleable. They can go up depending on what you do, and they can go down depending on what you do. So this is another project in Chattanooga, Tennessee. This is the river, that's the downtown, and they were trying to revitalize it by building an aquarium. But the downtown wasn't very walkable. But they thought, hey, if we build an aquarium, people come downtown and they'll stay for lunch and so on. Well, people would drive downtown, they go to the aquarium, and then they'd drive out. It wasn't a place. And one of the problems was they weren't connecting to the waterfront. This lack of connection. And so we thought, well, why don't we just change that big road into a 2-lane street and create steps down to the waterfront, and that would really help the downtown have an address. Now, the Tennessee DOT at the time, now they support what happened afterwards, but at the time, they didn't say no, they said, hell no, you can't do that. The city's lifeblood is the highway, and the mobility it provides is so important for the economic health and the convenience of the motoring public. And they said, we have to fight congestion, so we shouldn't take it away. First of all, take the lanes away. We should add lanes, because removing it is simply anti-progress. And the city, the community, was saying that walkability and access is more important. And that's key to the economic and social health of the city. And the highway is context insensitive. So two completely different paradigms, two different ways of looking at the same situation. And I'll go into that in a little more detail later. So that's the before picture. There's the aquarium on the left. And this is the same place after. And so clearly we won the struggle. And people come down here all the time. We reconnected. This was an access managed street, and we reconnected it. And now the downtown's more connected, is more vibrant. Other investments have come. There's more jobs and people and activity and social and economic exchange happening today than ever before. And now the DOT supports the project. And if you ask anybody if they want the big road back to cut the waterfront up and create a barrier, they would not want it back. But it's incredible at the time how necessary it seems to keep the big road. But the city gets better every time. This is just a bit of theory. Some of you may know this idea about the tragedy of the commons. It goes back to ancient times when there was a common grazing ground, and it was rational in the self-interest of each shepherd to to use the common grazing ground as much as they could, because it would save their own grazing grounds for later in the season. So it was rational in their self-interest. But if every shepherd were to do that, they would end up destroying the common grazing ground. It was called the tragedy of the commons. And so when you have a public resource and it's mismanaged, it gets destroyed. So you have to manage it so it can keep adding utility to all the shepherds. And there's lots of examples of this. If everybody who has a boat could catch as many codfish as they wanted, we'd have no cod in the oceans. If everybody with a chainsaw could cut and sell wood as much as they wanted, our forest would be decimated. And if people could pollute, instead of paying the money to have cleaner processes, then we'd have acid rain and our streams and our air quality would be terrible. So these are all examples of tragedy of the commons when it's rational and self-interest of the individuals not to profit, but it ends up hurting everybody, including themselves. I want to talk about the tragedy of the commons in terms of the perspective of speed, because highways and interstates and so forth are all about speed and car carrying capacity. You might remember the old AT&T commercial where the adult sits with the school kids and says, which is better, fast or slow? And they all yell, fast! And the narrator says in a nice, heavy, low voice, it's not complicated, faster is better. And which might be true for internet speed, but what about streets? So for 10,000 years we've had cities and streets, and for all but 100 of those years, value was a function of proximity to the center. So the closer you were to the core, the more valuable the land. As you moved out, it got less valuable. And after World War II in particular, the idea was, the conventional theory was that value was a function of travel time. And the idea was if we could speed up the streets and the roads, then the 5-minute and the 10-minute value contours would spread out. And unfortunately, this sounded great, and it informed most of the metrics that modern transportation engineers use now to evaluate projects and do their planning, but it doesn't work. So the value didn't spread, it was transferred to the edges. This actually devalued the inner areas, and Detroit's a very good example of that, but many more cities. And also, the streets and roads that got sped up became barriers and denied access across, and it changed the character of the place. But to an individual, like if I asked you, would you rather be able to drive to work faster rather than slower? You would probably say faster. It's rational in your self-interest. So if you ask everybody driving along, would you rather get to wherever you're going faster rather than slower? It would be rational in their self-interest to do that. So isn't it good public policy to take all the roads in and outside of your city and speed them all up? But the cities that do that have the biggest transportation problems and the most congestion. Houston is a poster child for that, or Phoenix, or places like that. So what it does is it sends value out, and you end up with a lot of suburban sprawl and issues in the core and along the streets that become the barrier streets. So this is a tragedy of the commons. So what's rational and self-interest in an individual driver, when scaled up to society, can do a lot of harm to your landscapes and to your built environments. Now the sort of support for this idea of speed it's nice at an individual level. It's very nice to be able to get faster rather than slower. However, it created a conventional paradigm. The whole industry switched where the higher calling was the traffic demand forecast model, and experts told the public what was good for them in terms of transportation. The focus was rewarding longer automobile trips, not access to land or anything like that. And you probably recognize some of these. The idea was to fight congestion, increase speeds, and keep traffic moving. And they were indifferent to the land use relationships, which is really important in this context. But it's simple. It's really simple and easy to understand, and it can be argued in sound bites, even though development is not simple. And that the strategies are pretty commonly known, adding lanes and speeding things up. And the capacity of streets was to move traffic. But the cities that did this the most, now we've had 3 generations of this kind of thinking. They lack identity, they have poor health outcomes. Cars were thought of as freedom back then, but now you have to use your car. It's your only choice. So if you don't have any choices, that is a diminishment of freedom. Especially if you can't afford a car, or you're too young or too old, or something like that. And it uses a lot of land and energy, and you have less vibrant places. So it hasn't stood the test of time. We've had 10,000 years of evolving cities, and this has been around for just 3 generations, and it hasn't worked out as it was intended. Just the idea was that you just move around faster and everything else would stay the same. But markets changed, land use planning changed, all sorts of things changed. And there's this traditional paradigm, which is the other way of looking at the world from a transportation lens. And this dates back thousands of years. And it's about community values, advancing community values. It's about rewarding short trips and different types of users. It's about maximizing proximity and place. It's integrated with land use and landscapes. It's about shorter speeds, nurturing businesses and what's on the sides of the street. And the cities that do this the most tend to have strong identities, use less energy, have more modal choices. So the point of this is that speed is like a pathogen for development. This is a typical city in the United States. And you can see the parts that were built before World War II. And you can see the old farm areas that were out of the city that had been suburbanized. And as we speed cities up, the suburbs keep growing. And you can see that around here. You just go to the southwest of the city or the north, any direction where the streets have been sped up, you see this kind of development. Now, above the horizon line, you see these green bars, and they represent value per acre in terms of taxes, and underneath represents the costs, the expenses per acre, for example, sewers and fire services and police services and so forth. The more urban, higher density areas generate more than enough income to cover their services. Low density suburban development doesn't. They cost more in services than they generate in taxes. And everyone in the suburbs thinks they're paying their fair share, but they're actually not. They're being subsidized by the older built areas. And this is, I haven't seen an exception to this yet. Urban3 is the company that studies these things. They haven't found an exception yet. But what happens at some point, when the suburbs grow enough, you start running out of money and have budget issues as a municipality, and you can't afford anything else but to fund infrastructure. And you have school funding issues, you have all sorts of funding issues because so much money is ending up subsidizing the expenses out here. So I always thought these issues would be based, solving these issues would be based on safety and placemaking and so forth. But there's a strong economic case for not speeding up traffic so you lose your landscapes. This is Buffalo, back in the day when there was no highways in Buffalo. And this was the highway plan, very complicated as you can see, 1951. And I just want to use this one example of a highway. This is an old leafy neighborhood, and this was an avenue with a linear park down the middle with trees. And one winter, somebody came in and cut down all the trees. And again, I just want to point out that church steeple hiding behind the trees there. And then shortly after all the trees were removed, now look for the steeple in the after picture. That got built. And so they left the houses. So they got no compensation for this. Their streets became the frontage lanes, and this is what they built. And what effect do you think that had on their quality of life and their property value and their neighborhood and walkability, placemaking and all that? This is Buffalo, and this is they had this fantastic Olmsted Park system, and you have the art gallery and the science museum and so forth built into the beautiful landscape. Can you imagine sitting on the patio here and looking at art, and then you've got the backdrop of the water? And then this got built through. That's the same view. And the idea was to speed folks through from the city out into the rural area, which was becoming suburbanized. And it completely devalued the entire park system and the neighborhoods and the quality of life in the community. And that's the comparison. Now, can you imagine having a reception out here now with the interstate going by?
Who was responsible for that? Was it Robert Moses?
Yeah, Robert Moses has his fingers in all these pies. And then, so this is what happened to Buffalo. They lost 55% of their population. The whole city declined and moved out to the suburbs and became car dependent. And so we were asked to come and look at this highway that was built through the park system, called the Sudakoto Parkway. And the New York DOT said, oh yeah, we're open to all your ideas, but you have to accommodate this much traffic and this design speed, and you can't touch the interchanges at the end. A lot of flexibility there, eh? So you have two interchanges. What can you build between two interchanges besides the highway? So it brings up the idea of a chimera. Like if you want to build something nice between here, you get this composition of incongruent parts that are unrealistic. And so they basically just said you have to build a highway. And so we didn't accept that. And this is a football player heading out to a fancy dinner with his cleats and his helmet on. So that's what they're asking us to do, but in a transportation form. Since it was a football town, we thought we'd use that. This is Robert Moses. Sorry, not Robert Moses. It's Olmsted. And Olmsted was a fantastic landscape architect, and he designed all these really great places and cities. And he was concerned about things like health and the functionality of the space and how it looked and felt. And he was an artist. He was an artist with the landscape. And so these are the sorts of places he built, which they put highways through. Now this is a piece of art by Vincent van Gogh, and it was stolen in 1945 at the end of the Second World War. Now if this art is hanging in your grandfather's basement, it's not his, and if he puts it in his will for you, it's not yours. You have to return it to the owners. And it was not the New York DOT's right to destroy this piece of art that belonged to the people and make this highway system. It needs to be restored and given back to the people. It was not, we'll take questions at the end, thanks. It's not the New York DOT's prerogative to dictate the terms of the replacement. They should not have taken the art, so they can't tell you what sort of piece you need to put in its place. It's up to the community. So we recommended removing the highway and restoring the relationships that existed. And what would you put in a park? An avenue? An alley? A highway? How about a parkway? That was not in the environmental assessment by the New York DOT. So just right there, you know that the environmental assessment wasn't worth the paper it was written on. And after we did our public meeting about this, they rescinded their environmental assessment because it did not include a parkway in a park. Rookie mistake, I would suggest. So what's the context? What's important in this landscape? And whose model should apply? Should it be the interstate builder? Or should it be the community? Should it be something to do with parks? Like, how do you approach this problem? So let's talk about 322. That's what it looks like, right at this arrow. Now, I have a question for you. Are you allowed to walk or ride your bike on this highway? Okay, you can. Now, let's say you could. Let's say it was allowed. Would you ride your bike or walk along it? Okay, just shout out a couple answers. Why not? It's dangerous. Okay. What else?
There's no room.
No room? Too fast?
Ugly.
Ugly. Okay, hostile, right? Okay, well that's good to know. Now at way over here, on the other side of the 99, you've got this fantastic hotel and convention center and other things there, and it's about almost 2 miles to the middle of State College. Have any of you walked there?
I have.
Oh, okay, and you're alive. Okay, great. Has anybody ridden your bike there? Oh, you have too. Okay, 3 people. How was the experience? Was it something that you would recommend for your mom?
It was a secretive farm road under the highway.
Okay, over there. Okay. So it's not pleasant, right? It's not a nice thing, even though it's so close. And these are the traffic volumes. The busy part's 39,000. Up here is 28, and it goes down to, in the rural area, it's only 14,000 cars a day. And this reminded me of my bike ride. So I live in Maitland, Florida. There's my house. There's downtown where I go to on my bike all the time, and there's a city hall, a grocery store, all shops and restaurants and so on. And that's my bike route. And sometimes I go further down to downtown Orlando. and that's the street I ride down. So I ride down the bike lane. Kids are riding to school. You see the school crossing. So it's part of the neighborhood. These are the traffic volumes. This is the busy parts, 47,000, 34,000, and about 30,000 along the street. And now when you compare the two, there's almost twice the traffic here, and double the traffic that's on this highway is here. It's a little bit longer, and it's slower. And I do this every week, a couple times a week, and it's fine. And so the environment that you create has a big difference on your willingness to use the space and then the connectivity and the value to your community. This is not a barrier. That's a barrier. This is dangerous. This is not dangerous. So you get the picture, right? And it carries more traffic. So these are the two areas at the exact same scale, taken from the exact same height above the ground. And this is what we call the blast zone of the highway. And you can see the area that's consumed where you don't want to be near, and it's just car-oriented and hostile. And I'll show you the blast zone of the signalized intersection that processes more traffic. It's right there. So that intersection processes more traffic than this, and pedestrians, and you have business up to it, tax-paying businesses, unlike anything around here. So which intersection is contributing more to society and to your place? So let's take a closer look at this unbelievable interchange. Like, that's unique. Let's pretend it's not there, and we're going to start again. Let's say you put 99 in on the exact same alignment, and we're going to recycle all the bridges, so it doesn't cost much. You could achieve the same thing with the same volumes with a parkway and a connected little network of streets. You still have a couple ramps on and off, so you can get on and off to go anywhere you want, but way simpler, way less land, and you can connect to the development over here in the neighborhood and so on, because there's already bridges there. And you could probably make another connection down to the football stadium, for game day or whatever, or other purposes. So you can get more connections because you're not on an access managed road. And then you could do a trail system connecting your existing trails and make a very comfortable walk or ride through your community, which you can't do today. There's people who drive between two land uses which are a mile or two away, and they have to use an interstate and a highway to do it. Like, that's ridiculous. And it processes more traffic. Now, this is the blast zone of, because you still have a couple ramps because you have 99, but look at the relationship with the land. This could be parks, it could be development, it could be all kinds of beautiful contributing things, and a lack of a barrier. So let's look at the broader picture. So we just talked about how we could simplify this and make it into a more contributing place. And the same thing can be at these other locations as well. And there's lots of different ways of doing that. And then at Miller Road, this is not a very elegant transition between a highway and your beautiful landscape with your rural road. So this is the city developed. So it's topped the highway, and it's going to continue to do that. There's 3 places to access the highway. The place is going to grow, and you've got a highway here and a highway here. And just like in Buffalo, you've got 2 interchanges pointing at each other. And the New York DOT really wanted to connect them with another highway. And I can come up with lots of other ones, like the 710 freeway in Pasadena is being removed, and they want to keep the connections. It begs itself for another highway. As long as this highway stays and this highway stays, there's going to be this just huge desire to connect them. Now, this was built in the 60s. Now, why would anybody build something like that around a little town with a little rural road with interchanges and so forth? Because they had a plan to continue this and make this into a big highway. And that was built in the 60s, so the plan probably existed in the 50s. So this idea comes from the 1950s by people who had no experience with the effects of highways on communities and landscapes. That wasn't a thing back then. So we're living with a predetermined outcome of getting an interstate through here. But now we know we don't have to do that. We have choices. There's examples around the country of not doing that. So what we call that part of 322 that attached to 99 is a spur. And what we are suggesting is to reimagine it. You don't have to have that barrier in your community. You don't have to have a low-performing street in terms of connectivity and multimodalism in the middle of your community. You could replace it with something very simple that can carry more traffic, can be more permeable and higher performing at a lower cost than keeping that overly fast highway in your community that you can't even walk or ride your bike on. So we would suggest reimagining that. And then, just before I go on, then that it shows a commitment to context sensitivity through this corridor, through the town part and in the rural part, and then the likelihood of just waiting another 10 years and trying to build the interstate and then another 10 years, that sort of preoccupation with one of finishing that 1950s idea would go away permanently for maybe 100 years, like your vision might say. So here's a couple of thoughts that I'm going to add to what Alex and Cindy said. I would not allow, if I were you in your community, I wouldn't build an interstate. I think if you build an interstate through your valley, it's going to, in my view, destroy your valley. It's going to destroy its aesthetic, its noise level. It's going to have a couple of interchanges which will focus all your valley traffic on a couple of spots, and the total, your character and your history will be destroyed just like it would have on Route 50. It doesn't fit. It fits here. So that's, you got to look for a good fit. A 2-lane parkway could contribute to the place as a thought. So if a parkway is not a serious alternative, then there's something wrong with the planning. Just like in New York, if whoever's coming up with the options for this idea, if this doesn't include a 2-lane parkway with left turns at key locations and maybe roundabouts at busy intersections, you need to question the EA because it's incomplete. You know, I don't know, maybe something like this. Maybe you would probably want your farms reflected. This is just a parkway elsewhere. You can see the path here for recreation. But something beautiful, something that actually adds, even more so than the road. And I suspect the road that goes through now is on the best alignment because it was put there historically for probably sensible reasons. But something like this would make the place really, really beautiful. And then, and don't get bamboozled by the traffic forecasts. Like I said, they're just one version of the future. And think 100 years, not 20 or 25. Typically forecasts go out 25 years. But take whatever percentages, let's say it's 25% or 30%, and then multiply that over 100 years. You really want a couple 100% more traffic? It will just continue to grow. So think about where you want it ultimately for your great-great-great-great-grandchildren and plan for that, design for that. Keep your historic place intact. So they're talking to the council here, and the guy says that the traffic demand forecast model says we need 2 more lanes. We empathize, but there's no choice. Now, we showed you some examples today of real places that did not follow the traffic demand forecast model and are better today for it. So are you going to believe what you see or what came out of a model? So that's the question you have to take. Now, the model has pseudoscience kind of supporting it, so it's got some kind of scientific backing, or at least sounding backing behind it. But it's built up on a bunch of assumptions, all with error. Never accept the idea that your ideas, your values are as important or more important than that model. That your say and your judgment is less than that of a conventional model. And just like cities can look at Copenhagen, great model, they don't have to follow the forecast either, neither do you. And then change 322 in town and in your rural area as it ought to be. Along it, as you travel along it, and across it. How does it contribute to the place, like Cindy was talking about? And at the end of the day, I suspect that the DOT won't agree to what I'm talking about. And I suspect, like in a lot of these other projects, that the people you're talking to aren't allowed to agree to that yet, because the vision has been since the 50s or 60s to build an interstate through here. So it's going to be a really tough road ahead. Like Alex said, it's hard. It's really hard to change the trajectory of these sorts of things. And it will probably end up being a political solution. But you have to go through the exercises. You have to do the EAs. You have to do the studies. You have to stay consistent with what's important to you as a community. And with that, I think we'll thank you for your attention, and maybe the other two can come up and we can have some discussion with some questions. Thanks. So any thoughts, questions, discussions, protests? So as is the culture here, we'll start at the left and move to the right. So maybe up here in the third row, please.
I don't know how many of you know, but this road was stopped before. It was 16 years before they connected from near Park Fork, near Fairview to Bolsford. It was an urban parkway eventually, but what they wanted to do was use federal money, make it all 4% grades, and there was no access. We live in College Township. The parks, it was going to go through 2 federally funded parks. That's the only way we stopped it. Was we found endangered plants and endangered animals in federally funded parks, and it worked.
So I need to share that with the group. So she mentioned that this has been fought before and won, and they used endangered plants and animals and parks to stop it. You have more tools now than you did before to help your vision prevail. But we didn't talk about it very much, but we were part of the big 710 fight in Pasadena, California. It's the longest running freeway fight in American history. And since World War II, every 10 years, Caltrans has been trying to build this highway through the community. And every 10 years, the community rises up and stops it again. They only need yes once, and then it gets destroyed. And the Caltrans had actually bought hundreds and hundreds of historic homes that they were going to demolish, and they were neglecting them so that it would demolish over time, which they ended up having to stop doing that. But they kept getting defeated by the community over and over again. And the most recent one, I think we've been involved with 2 of those fights every decade or so. And the last one, we finally killed it. We called it, what was it? What are those things that raise out of the ground, they don't die? I can't remember. Yeah, the zombie highway, that was it. We called it the zombie highway because we couldn't kill it. and it got stopped. And the last version of it was they were going to build a tunnel under the entire city of South Pasadena, 5-mile tunnel through 3 fault lines or something like that. Like, what could go wrong? Like, and the cost was unbelievable. But they had 2 stubs facing each other, just like you have, and they just really wanted to connect that together. So you're going to fight it again, and you'll end up fighting it again and again, even if you win this time. But if you can start rolling back that stub that goes through your town, then it shows a commitment to your vision and your context. And so that's why we would highly recommend that. So let's get another question. You had one just behind you? Yes, ma'am.
So I understand everything you're saying, and I am greatly in favor of a parkway type road, but I want to know if you went on that road today and if you saw the thousands of trucks, 18-wheelers, that are flooding through this road. This, in my opinion, is the reason that a parkway is problematic, because then you force local traffic to drive on the road with 18-wheelers that are headed through and beyond State College. They're not stopping here. They are going to I-99, and those are the most dangerous vehicles on the road. So I would almost rather have a road that goes through fast, gets them out, keep the local roads as they are, and go around. I don't know what the solution is. Your pictures show all these parkways with nice little SUVs and little cars all flowing nicely through, and that is not the reality of 322 at all.
Yeah, we saw that today. And do you think you get more trucks if you speed it up, or less trucks if you slow it down?
Well, I think if you slow down, they might go somewhere else.
That's the idea.
Yeah, so one of the one thing that's bad in a community is having trucks going through it. There's no doubt about it, but having them go through fast is even worse. And I suspect there's also local traffic on 322. In fact, anybody going to that hotel is probably on it as well. And I also suspect there's something wrong with the turnpike and the tolling, and so your community is getting kind of sacrificed for the benefit of cut-through truck traffic. And so if truck traffic is the problem or a problem, rewarding it is probably not a good solution. You should seriously think about it and look at, if that's a problem, put that in your vision, is to reduce the truck traffic and reduce their impacts. Like the noise from the tires, there's 2 sources of noise from trucks: brakes, an engine, and tires. And when they're going fast, you can hear that noise a couple miles away. Your entire Happy Valley is going to be truck tire noise. And so you don't even have to be on the highway to be impacted by that. And where were we? Montreal or someplace like that, where the health department studied air quality within, I think it's in Canada, so it's in meters, but it's about 400 yards, is unhealthy. So anybody within 400 meters of a big highway like that, their health is at risk. Asthma and all that kind of stuff. The life expectancies were down. So it's not cool on a number of levels. And I hope you don't get into a situation where you feel like you have no choice. You do have a choice. And if truck traffic is part of the problem, you need to put that in the problem definition and solve it, not accept it as a mandate. And you certainly don't have to reward it. So let's go at the back and then we'll go over here. Yes, sir.
People need to remember that Route 322 was designed and built about 100 years ago or so as the Great Lakes Highway to get truck traffic from the docks on the Atlantic coast to the Great Lakes. And it was built for that purpose. And trucks are going to be a normal part because the railroad's gone to hell without a handbag. And it's a matter of mitigating to the greatest extent possible the through traffic that we have. That's what I've been doing that trying that for 25 years now. But I haven't succeeded yet.
So truck traffic, the gentleman was saying that it was built for truck traffic 100 years ago. And I suspect there's other choices now. It's probably not the only truck route from the Great Lakes to wherever you said. So I don't think that's the only option, and I think the nature of truck traffic has changed over the last century, and it's not context sensitive anymore. And just because we did things, decades and decades and decades ago, doesn't mean it's still a good idea today, because it's affecting your safety, your health, your city, your form, your image, your history. So I don't think you have to accept that original role and perpetuate it, especially in today's environment when the rails aren't working as well as they did 100 years ago. Maybe there's a solution there in the long run. But if you lose your landscapes in the next 10 years, you're never getting them back. That's the thing. This is a one-time thing. Once it's destroyed, it's really, really, really hard to get it back. Now, people are removing highways that were built and did a lot of harm, but it's so much easier not to build them in the first place instead of building them and having to take them out. We speak from experience on that. Yes, sir?
Yes. Thank you very much. I've been following Toole's work for a long time, since the 2nd Avenue Bikeway in Seattle. That was the first time I was aware of it. So I have two questions. The first and most important one is, where is the concept album of the traffic calming musical? I absolutely must listen to that.
So I went to an arts middle school and high school, played the cello and participated in a bunch of musicals myself. And this community was so divided that I thought we need something to break the ice a little bit. And so me and this poetess from Middleburg wrote this thing, and there was 4 songs, and by the engineer, by the activist, by the politician, and by the who was an engineer. Is that right? Anyway, I got the cast mixed up. It was 1995, by the way. And we put it on and got people laughing, and then it was educational. And so we used a different way to reach people, because 3 talking heads at a meeting like this isn't the most exciting thing in the world, but a musical, like that's kind of cool. We didn't have time to throw it together, but it got put on then, and it got put on again in Portland, Oregon, when we were talking about similar subjects. And it's like a Gilbert and Sullivan musical, because you can change the jokes for the local folks. But actually, it's a good point. You probably won't do a musical, but you need to get the word out. You need to capacity build in the community. You need to build your vocabulary and your talking points, because the conventional paradigm, the conventional engineers who want to build a big highway, they have had 50 years of building up their scripts and their stories and their modeling and so on. And this is probably your first or second big highway fight. And so you're at a disadvantage right now, because they do this for a living, and they have lots of time, and they only have to get yes once. So it's really important to share these ideas and get together and talk and communicate and craft your own vision about what this place, what your landscapes and what your town want to be in 100 years. And that's the kind of thing that can move the needle, and has moved the needle, across the country. But maybe not a musical. The guy behind you? Oh, your second question. Okay.
Yeah, the second question, which I find fundamentally less important than the musical, is that currently Center County has basically no reliable intercity means of non-automotive transport. And so even if we were to spend all of the money to roll back the highway spur, to convert 322 into a parkway, maybe we do have some longer distance bicycle trails, but that still leaves us with the problem of there's no transit to Milliheim or Zion or Bellefonte. The nearest Amtrak station is 20 miles away in Tyrone. Excuse me, what prevents us from just fundamentally putting a pause on the highway projects first, using all of that money to build out better, more multimodal, active transportation, ideally rail transit using the roads that we already have to within 2 kilometers of downtown State College, build that out first, and then maybe we can do something about the highways and hopefully roll them back. Because even if we start rolling them back now, it's still just a car-dependent place, if a slower and more scenic one.
So the gentleman has a pretty cool vision about creating a multimodal environment. Transit is a tricky subject because unlike roads, that's a completely socialistic sort of thing. Like you look at who's using the roads and you provide them for free for everybody. Yeah, sure, you get for gas and your tag and everything. But transit is expected to generate its own income. So it has to generate enough ridership, and so it's a bit of an unfair playing field. The subsidies are, like, was it 90% for highways and was it 50% for transit, something like that? I can't remember the actual percentages. But it's not an equitable situation. However, you can start changing your land uses and your street network and the highways over time to create what's called a transit-friendly place. So it's transit-ready, and then when you do have the ability to get transit through rail or bus or what have you, you're prepared. It's hard to put in transit when places are far apart and sprawled and disconnected. One of the things that you want to do, if you were to build a parkway, the one I showed you had a multi-use trail alongside it, and this is kind of a normal practice, is parkways are multimodal and they're crossable, and so you could get the whole length east-west of your borough to be multimodal and comfortable and beautiful. So people could use it to get to work, to school, or just go for a nice ride. The idea of the trail going up, I don't know all the landmarks, but up from your football stadium through the medical area and up to the hotel and so forth, that could be easily accomplished with what we were showing. So all of these incremental changes can slowly move the needle to a more walkable, bikeable, friendly, more direct, like if you're driving your car even, you don't have to go out of your way to get somewhere. You have a direct connection to places, so your vehicle miles traveled starts to go down. And if you look at the Copenhagen model, and then you talk to a guy like Ole Durhaus, who was there at the time when they when they had a completely car-dependent city and nobody biked, a few people got together, crafted a vision, and it took them 20 years to become a pretty nice city. And they haven't stopped. They've never got complacent. And they continue to improve on their performance in terms of reducing their cost of transportation compared to their city wealth. It's like a quarter. They spend about a quarter on transportation, what cities like Houston and stuff spend. Because they're spending money on the most expensive way of getting around ever invented in the history of the world. And so if you're interested in keeping your taxes down, it's the Copenhagens that are really ahead in this way. And South Pasadena will be as well, because they're taking this approach so people can get around cheaper and in a more active way. But I would it's all incremental, and you need to stop the bleeding, like do no more harm, first of all, and start positioning yourself. I remember in the 70s going to Paris. Nobody rode a bike in Paris back then, and now it's a huge thing.
Sorry, I just also wanted to, I think to your point about the funding, right? You asked, why do we do this, why do we not do that? And I would maybe offer also that it's not mutually exclusive. These aren't issues that are kind of mutually exclusive. And there are funding opportunities. So the Reconnecting Communities dollars that Alex mentioned comes out of the bill, the bipartisan infrastructure legislation. And so there are buckets of money also for transit in that. And I think that's another mechanism by which, to make sure that it, as Ian mentioned, get involved in the conversation and make sure we're not creating competing interests that don't need to be. In a way, I think the multimodal aspect to a parkway is part of the conversation, but then also I think you're also asking a little bit about funding and how do we fund these as well, and I think there's other opportunities.
So part of the legislation for reconnecting communities at the federal level recognized that mistakes were made in the 50s and 60s, and I would suggest 322 is one of them because it cuts your city in half, and they will fund studies and help with the infrastructure changes to reconnect communities, the name of the funding source. So that's being used all over the country now to help ameliorate some of these sorts of problems. There's a whole bunch of questions. So, the guy in the white shirt.
Yeah. So I was wondering, you have some great case studies, and initially the DOT was against your proposal, and then you turned it around. Was it communities talking to their politicians to help them tell the DOT to?
Yeah. So it was Detroit 15 years ago or so, and when we first suggested removing it's Interstate 375, they literally laughed, and people questioned my engineering license and all this sort of thing. Like, they thought, this is Detroit. Like, this is what we do, and but they thought about it, and what we did is we worked with the community on things like vocabulary and scripts, so that they could communicate with city planners and politicians and so forth, and they built up a coalition of support, which eventually prevailed, and it went right to the federal government. You saw the governor, the lieutenant governor, and the Secretary of Transportation giving at that speech $105 million to get on with the removing of that highway that should really never have been built. So to correct it. Yes, ma'am. Well, let's go in order. So yeah, let's go there.
Okay, thank you. I've been working with a lot of ideas about this highway, and it makes me remember when we had what you're saying makes me remember that in the 1980s, we had a big get-together in the high school, actually, to talk about water, and it was the presentation was. It wasn't a presentation, it was actually a play where everybody played themselves, and there were people, like you could get someone like a highway person to talk about why they thought it was so important to have a highway, and then you could have someone else who was in another official position, like a landscape architect, to talk about what the options were, but having all different types of people really express themselves, but it was a choreographed play, but it was really valuable for the community. You had 400 people there to talk about it. That was one idea I had, going back historically. And then working with this particular highway, it seems like the trucks are a real issue. And it's huge, but why are they going they're going through here because they have the freedom of where they go. And especially if it becomes an I-322, they'll have even more freedom. So how do you restrict their freedom? And one of their problems is that the turnpike, which they could take, costs money, right? So that's an issue. Why does a trucker have to pay so much money for that? That might be some way of changing that. So that's another issue. Another big issue is Penn State traffic. It's huge, it's game related, and there's been no effort to use other means of transport, like using the railroads here, to think that through, the intermodal nature of things. That hasn't been even discussed. It's only this, as you say, 322 folks, the highway, PennDOT, they have this, shuttered vision of what you do with roads. But we have to break that down, but there are many options that we should explore, and they have to be done in a big setting, maybe Bryce Jordan Center, who knows. But we can't just be, what happens at these meetings where everybody gets together and talks is that they talk individually to each PennDOT person. Nobody talks together. And even when they had a big meeting, when people were able to voice their opinions, it was always, you had to say, it had to be a question. It couldn't be a statement.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the way they structure the meeting, so it doesn't give rise to a freedom of discussion, and that has to happen. But it has not happened yet.
To corroborate that, in the recent SCAC meeting, they did not provide a no-build alternative. They presented it as if a highway would be getting built no matter what.
Exactly.
So you brought up a bunch of things. First of all, the choreographed play is cool because it's another way of getting the word out. The truck problem is clear. There needs to be some solution to that instead of just them avoiding tolls and destroying your Happy Valley and your community. We have a saying at the firm: whoever controls the process controls the outcome. And if you control the process so tightly that you only have highway options and you can't ask questions and you can't get a coalition of support, then you're going to lose. And so you really need to communicate and get partners and get ideas going. And if they don't put in a non-highway option, like a parkway or something like that, then develop it yourselves. And
Wolfsburg, the Harris Township people put forth another option, but it was kind of shut down.
Okay, so the next question at the back there?
Well, that's exactly what I'm trying to get to, is this is terrific to be able to talk about this, but the state has invested significant funding in these assessments and in developing the plans. And I think that it's absolutely correct that they have not come up with a non-highway option. So what is it that we as a community can do to get them to stop for right now and to reassess? What is the strategy? What are the strategies?
A couple of strategies. So she said that the DOT, PennDOT, has spent a lot of money on advancing the highway. And by the way, we never talk about this in terms of them investing in it. They spend in it. You invest in what we're doing, you spend on that, because it doesn't have a return on investment. It will lower the value and the quality of your farm and your resources and your quality of life. What we want to do is invest in those things. So I would, and language matters, and it has an emotional attachment when you say they're investing. But if they're spending and you're investing, it changes the dynamic. The environmental assessment language is pretty clear. It was written so that anybody can understand it. And if there are reasonable alternatives that aren't being considered, it's a flawed environmental assessment. So that is a hugely powerful thing, especially if you suggested it in their support and if it makes sense. And you need to challenge some of the basic assumptions. When we were fighting the 710, Caltrans had spent millions and millions of dollars on consultant studies and so forth over decades following World War II to try and build that highway. There was no money for a counter plan. So they have champagne money trying to support this stuff, and we're on beer money trying to fight it, kind of thing. And not even beer money, water money. Like it's a pass the hat thing to fight this stuff. And if it were a fair deal, there would be similar funding for a community vision. It's your community, after all. Where's your $250,000 to study this, or $1 million? But there's plenty of that for studying the highways.
Well, I think, so you're asking for practical solutions, and I think the one thing that Ian mentioned is challenge that environmental assessment. And I think the other thing that he showed for the Virginia example was this vision. And crafting something that talks about a vision that's 100 years in length, I think is a really critical step in your process. So how that happens within the community I'm not sure exactly how that would happen, but I would say that's a big part of it, so that you can then say, this is what we want as a community. Those are really important steps, I would say.
One thing we did in Florida and West Palm Beach, we changed the comprehensive plan of the city to prevent the wrong-headed road widenings in our city, by the DOT and others. And if you craft this vision and put it in your comprehensive plan, and if you talk about your values and so forth, it's very difficult for state DOTs to come in and usurp your plans, and they have to respect them. Also, keep up this idea of making it a scenic byway and area. Get farmers to ease their land for conservation easements, and do everything you can to make it difficult to someone to take your land and put an interstate through here. Like, everything you can, because it's all on the table now. So if there's some wealthy people who can buy development rights and that kind of thing, anything like that, do that. And call your politicians and say, hey, look, this is not cool, what's been proposed. And so any way you can do this is important. Sir, and then we'll come back to the front.
I think the other thing is, as a community member not in the valley, but I have to listen to the trucks every night, I think a lot of us in the community think it's just inevitable that you've got the two arrows pointing at each other and, okay, that's it, right? And so I think for those who are personally affected, if they can use this as an inspiration to say, hey, there is an alternative, and to communicate that to the rest of the community, then that might be more powerful. Right now, I think I just happened to come to this because of the last minute, but I think we all just think it's just going to be one of these 2 or 3 routes or whatever, and that's it, we're done. So
you need hope and optimism, and I think Dan, who brought us here, sees what we're doing. He does some incredible things through the historic lens and the landscape architecture lens, and I think we're not really public speakers or anything, but we do cool projects and people want to hear about them. And you're not alone. This happened before. There's pioneers who have fought these battles successfully. So you have precedences now. The federal government sees this. They've admitted that they've made mistakes, and they've provided funding to help fix it. So policies are changing, language is changing. You saw the language policy that's there. So get on top of the shoulders of the people that have done it before, and make this another one of those examples. So you said there's a... Yes, sir. And then we'll cover Heather.
Yeah, kudos on that intersection diagram that just shows the incredible use of space. And if you go to that space, it's one of the best views of the whole region. You see Mount Nittany, you see the community, and instead you're merging in traffic in that experience, And, there's a lot of people in this room that 25, 30 years ago were talking about I-99, 220, and how to plan for that, and how can we get something different here. And as a landscape architect, the model I found was that Paris Pike example, and I know that was mentioned earlier. With your national understanding and experience, I mean, what do you think is the best model out here that fits this region? And I know the true solution would be you facilitating a process here, getting a community vision, and working through it that way. But with your experience, what do you think is the best model out there that we should take a look at of a community addressing our issues?
Collaboration is probably the key, and like Cindy said, you really need to really have a good discussion about the vision, and do think 100 years from now. Like my profession as transportation engineers, we keep telling people we only can predict 25 years out because there's so much error after that. It's not very helpful. But that's not very helpful for your place and your valley. it's been around here for a couple hundred years easily, and it's going to be around for a couple hundred years. Think in these 25-year increments, thinking that everything will be done. If they built the highway or if they widened the road, 25 years from now it's going to be filled, because that's what happens. You know, the I-10 project in Houston was a great example. They had a lot of congestion on this highway, and they, Texas style kind of thing, they added so many lanes, and I remember they were talking like, we're not going to have congestion for 20, 30 years, it's going to be great. And within 2 years it filled up, and it was worse than before. So there's this, highways and interstates help generate their own need. And the problems that interstates and highways create can typically only be solved in conventional minds by building more of it. And it's just never ending. And again, we've only had 3 generations of experience with that, and that's not a sustainable model. You know, we have enough 20/20 hindsight to realize that we really need to do something else.
Yeah, and I think I just want to add, you asked, you know, what are some models that we could look at, and I don't know that there's one that's exactly transferable. Of course, you know, it's a different context, as you already mentioned. I do think there are other examples. You know, Ian talked about a parkway. I think we naturally gravitate, like, what does this want to be? It wants to be sort of something that really responds and works with the landscape. I think there are also, I would offer, there's one, and I can share a little bit more about this with you afterward if you're interested. Upper Harbor Terminal, which is a part of Minneapolis, Minnesota, where there's a beautiful Grand Rounds parkway system through that whole area by HWS Cleveland, and they're trying to finish some of these rounds. And there's an area actually called the Upper Harbor Terminal, totally industrial landscape, and so naturally huge trucks are going through here. And the idea was to create a new street system in that area, and I think there's some relevance there. Again, totally different context, but in managing that conversation between the traffic, or the trucks that are coming to that area, that need to come to that area, because I'm sure some of the trucks are coming here, and how are we handling that? How are we still accommodating some of that? I think is still going to be a balancing conversation, but that might be one to as an example.
The Bronx River Parkway, both Dan and I worked on that at different times, I guess, right? So in White Plain, there's this beautiful remaining part of the Bronx River Parkway. A lot of it's been turned into highway. But there's this one hill, and by the way, this place was entirely designed. They moved millions of cubic yards of dirt to make hills, and I can't remember how many hundreds of thousands of bushes and trees they planted, but it was a designed, curated landscape for the early days of driving, so you could go out into the park. It used to be a very polluted area with industry, so much so that the water would run down to the zoo and kill the animals. So they took out the industrial land and built this fantastic park system with the parkway. And there's one hill in particular that broke the camel's back for the planners at the county where this is located. And the hill was built, and as you came up the hill, the park designers, landscape architects, designed, it's kind of enclosed you in trees. And then you crested the hill, and it opened up. And so the idea was to move you physically through the landscape, but also emotionally through the landscape. And so when we were driving along 322 today, we could imagine that there was all these cool curves with these views and the topography changes. You could have some of the most awe-inspiring experiences as you move through this landscape. And it's not about getting through fast. It's about getting through and enjoying it. Like, where was it? In Atlanta, Delray Beach, Florida, on Atlantic Boulevard. And it's an urban example, but it explains the situation. So they had a main street that had been there forever, a historic main street. And the DOT had jurisdiction over it, and it was the main route to get to 95 for hurricane evacuations. So they said it has to be 4 lanes so that folks could get away from the water. Of course, they're all going to 95, and there's 400 lanes going to 95 and only has 6 lanes, and so you're never going to get there fast anyways. But anyway, they said they had to have 4 lanes. So they did that. They built 4 lanes on the main street, and the main street died. It was no longer a place. Even though the stores were there, they went under. And so the city said, we'll sacrifice the 2 residential streets parallel to it and make them one way so that folks can get out of the harm's way quickly to 95. So they agreed to that. So the 2 streets were made one way, the 4 lanes were made to two lanes, and the Main Street bounced back because it was a really nice experience. However, nobody was using the 2 one-way streets that were sacrificed, and they couldn't understand why, because the assumption in transportation planning is everyone is just interested in travel time. So they had these attractive surveyors with police go out and pull over random drivers and say, what's your trip purpose? Why are you on the street, not on other streets, and that kind of thing. Where's your origin destination? And it turned out that people like nice experiences when they're driving. So they would go down the Main Street, even though it was slow. The DOT would call it congested, but it was slow because they wanted to see what was going on. They wanted to feel the community and see, maybe I'll go back here for supper tonight or something. That's what they were going for, the experience, not to reduce their travel time. So they eventually made the 2 streets 2-way again, and so now they have just a busy Main Street, which was their goal. And you've got this diamond in the rough just sitting out there with a relatively normal road design right now. But it could be spectacular, like the Bronx River Parkway. You've already got topography and curves and interest and cool buildings and farms and views, and it's all here. And with the parkway, with the curbs as we showed, if you decided to do that, the trees can be close. You don't have to have those big clear zones, and you could create that sense of enclosure opening up and create one of the most marvelous experiences for people going through or people going within. Like, you get to live in a really super cool place. Your identity will go up. Your community pride will go up. And if you slow it down, that helps trucks want to go somewhere else too. So it can have a lot of synergies, and in your rural area and in your built area as well. Are we out of time?
Over time. So
I've got time.
Yeah, so we have to be out of here by 1 o'clock in the morning.
So I guess I'll take this home right now to say, if you need to, you don't mind staying a little bit until 1 a.m. If you appreciate everyone coming, I see people are leaving already. Feel free to leave. If you want to stay and chat, you guys are happy, I'm happy, we like to talk about these things, so you're very welcome to stay. But if you must feel like it's impolite, it's polite now, so. Okay. And I'll just say formally right now thank you very much, thank you guys, we're really thrilled having us here. And more questions.
You're watching CNET, Center County's Government and Educational Access Network.
SCLO Library is proud to be centrally located in downtown State College, but parking in our popular location is at a premium. To maximize easy, free parking for library patrons, SCLO Library has installed a new parking system. 4 easy steps will provide library patrons with a low-stress parking experience. 1. Enter the SCLO Library parking lot and take a ticket. Bring your ticket into the library with you, as you will need to validate it a few minutes before you leave the building. 2. Spend as much time in the library as you would like. When you are ready to leave, remember that your vehicle must leave with you. 3. A few minutes before leaving the building, validate your parking ticket. There is one validation station located in the lobby. Scan the QR code, listen for one beep, remove the ticket, and wait for the thank you screen. Once a parking ticket is validated, it must be used to leave the parking lot within 20 minutes. 4. Scan your validated ticket at the parking lot exit. We hope you enjoyed your visit to the library, and we'll see you again soon. We're all in this together, so never panic. Library staff are here to help with any questions, issues, or concerns you might have.